Well, I'm going to call this workshop to order. We are here today for a workshop to discuss reserve policy for the city. And we have 3 reserves just for the people. We have electric reserve, water reserve, and sewer reserve. Those are because those are the 3 things that we sell that we have a income to keep the tax base low, if we possibly can. But we also have those funds in there in case there would ever be a problem on those particular issues to help maintain, to do whatever would need to be done. We'd have a well to go out, and we had a well to go out here a few years ago. And we had to have it come in and pulled and do some work. And at that time, we had to go and just we put in a new submergible pump instead of having the pump up on the surface. So anyway, we made some improvements there. But on the reserve, we try and maybe decide what percent each year to do. And then also, we might want to put in as to what percent we want to have as our year's expenditures. Some places, and it's on the back of the paper, go anywhere from 15% to 50% of the expenditures. So you take and look at our expenditures, and our budget expenditures for the electric is, this past year, for the electric fund was $4,734,000. So you figure that up, and let's do a 50% deal. We got $2,350,000 plus dollars that we would have in there. So that is quite a deal. And they don't just necessarily cap that off either. They may go over, but that is a minimum that they want to try to keep. And the great town of Kansas City only does 2 months expenditures, which is actually 16% of their budget for that. Moberly does 15%. Grain Valley, Battlefield, 25%. Arnold does 34%. But anyway, and the Battlefield, they try to keep 25% in there, but they do have a cap that sets it at 12 months or 1 year. So at this time, I will let Mr. Walden give his figures that he has there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have some extra copies if anybody wants to look at the same sheet we're looking at. The mayor mentioned the 3 reserve funds we have, electric, water, and sewer, and you have the last fiscal year completed that ended June 30th, what those balances were, including checking and the CDs. And then I also showed in this year's budget, the 2013-2014 budget that we're in right now, how much we budgeted to transfer into the electric reserve. And then going off of what the mayor said, most cities typically shoot for having a certain percentage of their annual expenditures in their reserve funds. And so I've listed the last year-end figures we have for the 3 different areas, electric, water, and sewer. So you have the 2012-2013 year-ending expenditures for electric, and just so you know which numbers I'm referring to. For electric, that was a little over $4.7 million. Water was $443,000 plus change, and then sewer was $338,000 and change. And then, for just as an example, let me drop to the bottom 2 lines first. You know, the policy that the alderman you end up approving could include whatever variations on this you want. But one aspect, you know, we do something similar to the other cities, would be to say that we want whatever percentage of our annual expenditures for that area that we want to get to where that's set aside in the bank, if you will, where if needed, if we had a natural disaster, or if we needed to do improvements right away, that we would have the funds there to do so without being detrimental to that year's budget. And so, in the example the mayor used, if we say we wanted 50% of our annual expenditures, then for electric, that would be half of the 4.7 that we would try to move towards having set aside for, electric operations, for things that if we needed to do something that we hadn't budgeted for, that met the policy of, what you say could be done out of that, we would have the funds set aside to do that. The percentage of that you transfer each year is just the way you, through your budget, that we get to that point. So since we couldn't get to half of 4.7 million in, one shot, we could set aside money each year in our budget to go towards meeting that goal. And so that's the percentage of the operating, the expenditures that we could budget to transfer towards that. I put an example of 5% here, and just walking through that, since the last completed year, we had spent $4.7 million out of the electric fund. 5% of that would be $236,742.16. That would be a little bit more than what we're budgeting this year to put towards the electric reserve. This year we're budgeting $200,000. This would be in next year's budget if you adopted that policy and that percentage. Then we would budget to put $236,742.16 into the electric reserve. In water, we didn't budget anything to go towards that reserve this year. And if you look real quick, if you add the CD and checking there, the 156,000 plus 268,000, that's roughly 420, almost 425,000. That's almost a full year's budget of expenditures. Last fiscal year that ended June 2013, we'd spent 443,000. So right now, our water reserve is almost at a full year's, worth of operating expenses for the water fund. Sewer fund, the last completed fiscal year, we spent $338,830. 5% of that would be $16,941. So if we included that, transferring that amount as part in next year's budget, then that would get added to the $2337 that's in there now. So there's at least two components, and I listed a cap here. You may want a minimum. It just depends on how detailed you want your policy to be. And
what is a realistic figure? What is a realistic figure that we should have in these?
Well,
considering the size of our municipality.
Most cities shoot for having about 25% or 3 months operating. And so, if we went with 25%, then that would be a fourth of the 4.7 million would be our target for the electric reserve. A fourth of 443,000 would be our target for the water fund, and we're already there. Then a fourth of the sewer operating expenditure would be a fourth of 338,000. And again, we've got a ways to go to get up to that point.
It's like Fat City's got 50%. Right? And the smallest one is 16%, is Kansas City. Right?
Right now, we don't have any specific target, so anything we adopt, we're doing more than what we have been, although, we had budgeted to 200,000 for this year, and that's better than nothing. But if we want to be more aggressive than that about building these reserves up, then we just budget for that. And you can tell even at this 5%, if you add the 236,000 plus 22,000, plus 16,000, that's a little under 300,000, about 275. So looking at this year's budget, you know, we budgeted a transfer of 200,000 to electric. We would be going from that to looking at the three funds together, about 275,000. Now, assuming we want to keep revenue estimates the same in next year's budget as this year's budget, then the only way we could do that is if we decrease, you know, expenses by that dollar amount.
Is this open for public comment?
Yes?
Do you have,
And it's not even for, okay,
Well, that's it, if you want, yeah, but a workshop's not for public.
not for public, but he can.
Go ahead.
Well, it's gonna be
Go
here
ahead.
anyway,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
I think so.
well, I'm just, you have 200,000 to transfer from electric to reserves now,
That's what we got budgeted.
but is it there? I mean, your ending balance was 136 of June 13.
Well,
Or
this
June 30th, yeah. But I just curious if you had ample cash flow in there to make that transfer.
We don't know yet.
we're updating our financials, and
Still 2 months.
we'll bring a recommendation back based on our current financial status for that transfer.
Yeah.
I hope to do as much of that as we can.
Yeah.
And we're watching budgets and, you know, doing our best to be able to fully fund that transfer.
Well, of course, being a county commissioner, and I've been on several budget committees and workshops in the state and other places, but a rule of thumb that most municipalities and counties work on is to have 50% of their annual budget, and that includes everything. That's not one specific department, but have that much in reserve for national disaster. So, I mean, probably if you set a percentage for your total budget to try to, if it's 5% for your total budget for a year, and try to add that to reserve, it wouldn't take long till you were, you know, 5 or 6 years, you'd be back up to where you need to be. But sometimes, I mean, you can budget things, but if the money's not there, it's pretty hard to transfer it, you know. But I was just curious if you would be able to actually make the transfer at the end of this fiscal year.
I'm hoping we do every bit of this.
Yeah, okay.
And right now, Dr. Trina, I don't know if you got a copy of what our CDs are, our reserve CDs are right now, but we have almost 2.5 million in reserves, but some of those, as you know, restricted, like we
Yeah.
have at the county, so.
No, I didn't hear about
And I think your amount is gonna have to be, unless you wanna go with this percentage, your amount, the budget committee, we voted and approved putting $200,000 in this year. And I think the question is how you gonna put it in? Are you gonna put it in monthly, weekly, or what, to make sure at the end of the year you've got that?
That
To
could
me,
be
that's
another
a more
aspect of
important
the,
thing than to try to figure out what percent of what budget of the line items or what you're talking about over here is. First, we haven't been putting anything in, have we?
We put 100,000 in last year.
I mean, this year.
No, because we don't know if we're going to have it. We're still
Well-
operating, we still have 2 months of the budget left to operate on it, so we don't know if we're gonna have it.
Well, shouldn't that 200 be included in when we put a budget of 10,940,000? Should that budget be, if this 200,000 that next year, if the people wanna put 300,000, can you take that and divide it by 12 and each month put that in the account? And then you know you have it, because we don't do anything else that way. We bought some things this year that was not even in the budget.
What?
Well, we bought 4 new police cars that wasn't in the budget.
Yes, they were.
it. The other one.
Didn't know that. I thought we had 1 in the budget.
No,
No.
we had a payment in the budget for those cars. And that's what that money was in there for. It wasn't for one car. It was a payment for a car.
I'm out of it, that's double talking to me.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay, if you put this money in,
We
divide
borrowed
it
the
by
money, so
12,
how could we have it in the budget?
because we had to make a payment, and the payment was in the budget for the lease purchase agreement. That's what was in the budget, was the payment on the lease purchase agreement. But on this, if we divide this out by 12 months and put it in there, what if 1 month it takes out all the expenses to operate, and we don't have the money to put in there that month? Or we need to, if something happened and we didn't have the money to put in there, what do you suggest that we put in the policy to do?
Well, we budget so much for the vehicles, we budget so much for this, and I think it's not just a guess that we're doing, we're calculating something to come up with those totals.
But they're estimates.
We do the wages, we do everything here, we budget it.
Yeah, it's an estimate though.
But what Mary's saying is, some months you have greater expenditures than you do other months. So, I mean, 1 month it might not cash flow to have 20,000 surplus. It's just, you may have to buy a bunch of product or have an emergency or whatever. So, I mean, any specific month may be a good month or a bad month. If it's a bad month, you won't have the 20,000 put in there. If it's a good month, you might have 40,000 put in there. But it should be a budgeted item that would come in at the end of the year.
And that's what we always do, is wait till
Try
the
to
end of the
do
year,
it
make all the
because,
expenses.
it's just like, you never know what's gonna happen in a particular month. I mean, you may have a huge expenditure, they may have to buy 100 light bulbs some month, and would, take a lot of money out of that particular budget. So I can understand that setting a figure to do it on a monthly basis would be a pretty precarious thing to try to accomplish. I do think you need to set a figure that should be a yearly designated amount and make sure you can do that.
That's what I was talking about, so how are you gonna make sure you do that?
Huh?
How are you gonna make sure you do that?
Well,
If you wait till the end of the year to put it in there?
Well, if you just wanna make sure you got 200,000 in there and put it in. That's, you hope, and if you don't, then you haven't managed your budget well. Something's went awry somehow. But, I mean, that should be the goal, is to have that money at the end of the fiscal year to apply to a reserve. But, I mean, it's just like household expense. I mean, some months there's money left and some months there isn't, that's just the way it is. But it'd be nice if you could do it monthly, but, I'm sure there's much that you couldn't.
Or even quarterly. But you gotta start somewhere, you can't, I don't see the purpose of waiting at the end of the year
Yeah.
and hoping that we've got 200,000.
Well, I mean, a quarterly thing would be, a reasonable thing to do, and try to do it quarterly if you could. If you couldn't, well, you just have to do the best you could and try to make up it, next quarter. But I think you need a goal and you need to strive to, get there, one way or the other.
That may be why Moberly's got listed 15 to 25%. They try to do whatever they can and don't lock themselves into one certain amount.
But that, I think these goals here, that's the percent of their annual budget that they want to have on reserve.
I think so.
So, I mean, if they've got that on reserve, they may not put any more into the reserve, it's possible. But, so, I'd say that, that could fluctuate.
Now we're talking about the total budget, like
That, I would say, is
$11
their
million
total.
we had last year?
Yeah,
Right, Adam?
yeah, I would say that's the figure of their total budget.
So that'd be a pretty good amount of
Well,
money.
percentage of that area is operating budget.
Pardon?
Percentage of that department's operating budget. So like the 5% or whatever would be of our electric.
Yeah,
We could, since this is would be a new policy for us, maybe start out with a 6-month posting and see how we do. If we can't do that, we will be coming back to the alderman anyway But if we can do that and still meet our other cash flow obligations, that could be a starting point. And, you know, we could adjust that timing as needed by ordinance, you know, or if this becomes a policy.
You know, and I understand where you're coming from. I know you wanna save, put money in savings, and that's your top priority, but they still have to operate too, and we only have money coming in each month. So, and then expenses for each month, and you kinda operate month to month. So it would be kinda hard to, at the beginning of the fiscal year, put in $200,000 and then hope you have
Well,
enough of the rest
that's
of the
why
year
we're-
to operate on.
That's why we're working on it quarterly or whatever. I know you can't do it to start with, but after 3 months, the profit that we're making off our electric, there should be money there to put it in the reserve. If we don't have the storm, and then if there's nothing in the reserve, you're gonna have to pull it all out of the reserve to start with. Fix the problem.
How much did it cost us that last storm that we had here a few years ago? The tornado.
The hurricane.
The ratio,
in-
or
the
the
ratio.
ratio.
May 8th, 09?
Yeah, do you have, how much did y'all spend over in the electric department right off the top?
I really don't know off the top of my head. I filled out all that FEMA paperwork,
Right,
Got it.
we got,
this job's paperwork. It was, $500 to $750.
And how much of that was FEMA?
75%.
Yeah. This SEMA actually stepped in a little bit, I don't know.
And let's be truthful about the situation on that. A lot of that was time for equipment that was in there that we would charge, which actually, that's the way it's run, but you, was paid for the equipment usage that was in there. So it was actually no dollar amount out for that. So, but for the bottom line, I was thinking bottom line on the material and everything was just a little under $100,000 for everything. And most of that was replacing wire, poles, and transformers. And so we were very, very fortunate because of the tree trimming policy that we had set up, and that worked out pretty good for us.
I mean, FEMA broke it down into each load of brush hauled to
Yeah,
the industrial
yeah.
park,
Right.
all the way to what, if you had a golf cart on somebody riding around a golf cart, they charge for that.
Right.
I mean, there was a lot of paperwork with that little expense stuff.
They designate a dollar amount for every piece of equipment, whether it's a pickup, dump truck, backhoe, a grader, whatever, and that's the rate they pay by hour.
And then is salary in there too?
Yes,
Yeah,
hours worked.
They usually do prevailing wage, but in cities that don't have prevailing wage, they do your wage plus fringe benefits.
I think that's what we had to figure out.
That's what we
they're
did.
running.
Yeah.
yep. I actually found a whole stack of that paperwork yesterday in the office.
But we were very fortunate. Number one, we had to build up our stock because we used our stock on the poles and wire and transformers. But we had it there. We didn't have any dollar amount that immediately went out. But we did have to redo that
Fortunate.
in the
That could
budget
have been
year.
worse.
Yep. Very fortunate. Now, again, on the reserves, about the only thing that we have reserves for is the money on the areas where we make money. Street department, you don't have a street department reserve or anything like that. But it was like we were talking earlier before we started, in the street department this year. Our money, we were gonna probably be under budget this year on payroll because we've had so much overtime because of the storms and ice cleanup and snow cleanup. We're already over budget on the salt because we had to purchase some. We had some given to us from Walmart. surprisingly, they had salt that was hard, and we had to get it and do whatever we could from it. They couldn't sell it, but we've been fortunate. But the reserves funds is just for those areas, and you will see them in here. Electric fund has a reserve, the water, and the sewer, because that's what we make money off of. And so you have to be prepared to make sure that those areas continue to fluctuate and go.
So what would be a realistic figure then?
A lot of towns will go with 3 months or 25%. I think that would be a good starting place.
We could set it up at 25% per quarter?
Well,
He's talking about
The
the
payment.
cap for, pardon me?
Yes.
What he wants in there and the big balance.
like 25%, if you went with that, that would mean in the
Right.
electric fund, we would work to getting that up to
Right.
a fourth of that. And so the other question is, from a given year's budget, how much towards that goal do you want to budget for?
Okay, what I'm saying though is, what would be a realistic percentage
On a yearly basis.
on a yearly basis?
I'd say 45.
You know, the 5% would be putting in more than what we did this budget year. Higher than 5% would be more aggressive, we would reach that goal sooner. But, you know, the addition of that over what we're doing this year would have to come out of other areas, unless we, you know, look at revenue.
Now, for your cattle, I recommend, I don't know how to say this, but you could always start out at 25%, and if we get there quick and you think you could do it more, then down the road, we can change that policy and raise it a little bit.
That wouldn't be per year, you're looking.
I'm
the
looking at
entire total.
right. And it could take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years to get there, but when we finally get there, then we can see how this time has went to get there, and then if we can do it, you know, make more, keep putting more and more and more in there, then we can raise that fee.
I would think that 5% would be pretty aggressive starting out. I mean, if we can, we can. But 3 to 5 anyway, anywhere in that area would be a help, and we'd be doing more than one fund too.
Well,
I just don't wanna cut services to the community to get a reserve built up. That's what I'd say.
And if you were content with where we're at with the water reserve already, Alderman could choose not to budget, you know, for that.
Right.
If you were content with where that reserve balance is already at.
But we could still mention it, that we're there, so we wouldn't have to put any money in there unless it had to be used or something.
Right.
But if money flows through that easier and it's more profitable, we could go ahead and do the 3 to 5% on that, and whatever accumulation you had, it eventually winds up in the same place. Anyway, it's total money in reserve. So, yeah, I mean, it may be easier to get it through the water department than it is through the electric.
And one thing too, if you ever have an emergency, you could borrow from that
Oh.
fund, but you have to pay that fund back.
Right.
That's one thing if you would ever, but you would have to make sure that got paid back.
Well, I suggest that we go ahead and set a figure between 4 and 5% on a quarterly basis. See
You
how
need
it
to be
goes.
paid quarterly.
To be paid for, not 4 or 5% a quarter, but
No, right.
4 to 5% for the year
Yes.
of expenditures,
To be
but
paid
paid out
quarterly.
quarterly.
I wouldn't have
Do we have the capabilities of doing that?
Oh, I think so, because the way that we've looked at this, that Ray's brought to, you know, we're going on, like, and I don't know if you're using this for an example, but we know this was definite, you know, so, for the 2012-13 from the previous year. Now, if you wanna do on that budget year, that you're working on, like for next 2014-15, if you want to start with that year's budget and put that in there, that would just, we just know where you want us to start from.
Okay, now, once that money is in that reserve, it can't be used for anything other than electric. If it does need to be used for something, then there is stipulation that's got to be paid back into that reserve.
That's,
Yeah, you can put that in your policy.
Yes,
you can
yes.
put it into policy, but I think that's state statute.
Okay.
And I would assume use reserves where it takes alderman, you know, approval to spend
Right.
out of it.
Right.
You
That
can
should
put that
be,
in the
budget.
policy.
that should be in the city ordinance anyway. shouldn't
Well,
it?
you do that in your budget. When you approve your budget, you've approved some of these transfers and taking money out of the savings reserves account. And that's approving it that way too.
So we have to have the attorney draw this up.
No,
It's-
we can do it ourselves.
It'll be a policy, and you'll just vote on the policy at the next meeting. That'll be one of the agenda items under the miscellaneous business.
Okay.
We don't have a vote to read.
Do you wanna cap that, or do you wanna have a minimum that we're shooting towards?
I wouldn't wanna cap it until we see how it works.
Okay. Well, you know, water, again, that's one where, I mean, you can make a decision, we're okay, or, well, how about minimum? How much of that year's operating budget do we, or expenditure do we want to try to get towards?
4 to 5%.
Well, that's right, but then as these reserves build in balance, for example, how much towards that 4.7 million would we want the electric reserve to get towards? Or,
Probably 25. I'd go 25%.
Yeah.
okay,
Do you want it on all three funds, or
I don't think
25
that-
for
I don't think
electric
that-
and
I think we
lower
ought
on
to
water?
concentrate pretty much on the electric fund right now till we get it rolling.
Well, you need to do it on sewer too.
Yeah, we need to do something on sewer.
Okay, what are we gonna need those reserves for? On
Sewer.
sewer?
You can use it on the sewer treatment, you can use it on,
Any major problems that you would
Sewer.
have on your sewer lines, lift stations. We have lift stations that we need to keep, that we have to keep an eye on. And we got a lift station that we spend quite a bit of money
Well,
out of.
could we concentrate on the electric and the sewer then? The water seems to be in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
so we can figure out what that percentage is that we've got in there. I just think I don't wanna leave something out, you know, and then have to come back later. Don't you agree, Ray? I think if we address one, we need to address all three, but if this is there, then we set that percentage at what's there.
I would suggest that you do reserve on all three funds, and if the water fund builds up a lot, it'll just be built up, you might have to borrow from it sometime. Yeah.
And if it should get to the point that you'd have to borrow from it to fund the other two at some point, you're not hurting it as bad as you would these others.
It's, water and sewer have strict state statutes on using their money other than just for water
I
and
know
sewer.
it'd have to be
Electric
put
doesn't,
back.
but water and
I
sewer
know it'd have to
does.
be put back, but it might get us out of trouble
Well,
somewhere.
that could, yeah.
We might have to revisit that down the road about the capping. If the water gets too big, we might have to cap it for sure.
No, you're gonna need to drill a well before too long. So there is, I mean, that's something that, it's not gonna happen in the next year or two, but in the future, you're gonna have to drill another well. Or have a storage facility. And the storage facility will come before the well. Because that's almost a given right now.
Did you get Dr. Toon? I can get in mine, but as you'll see here too, Dr. Toon, we've got these electric and water and sewer DNR accounts and reserve accounts, and we used to have P&I accounts. Those were all set up in the sixties when they had bonds, a bond issue. And they've all been paid off in the eighties, I think late eighties, early nineties, I can't remember. And they did close out the P&I, but they've left these electric reserve and DNR accounts open to be used. The sewer DNR fund, we have to definitely put money in that fund every year because of a grant that we had received, $29,000. But the others are,
What about the landfill thing?
that's for that closure, and there was a 30-year, we have to keep money in this account for 30 years in case something comes up out there. And I want to say, I've got the paperwork in my office when that will be over, our 30 years will be up. And then is there another additional 5?
There's
On
more
that-
time after at the end of it, there's time, but it's not as restrictive. And the money, actually the money that you can keep in that fund each year
Down each year.
goes down a little bit because you actually are supposed to be using it out there, but we've never really taken any money unless I think one year
We have to do a,
fertilize
they do a
it.
test or something
Yeah.
once in a while, we pay for that. That has to, and I want to say
For the next 10
2024.
years.
Pardon
Is
me?
it like 2020s?
Something like that, maybe.
I'd say within 10 years you'll be there.
Yeah, because that was done when you were first come on board as Alderman.
In the
wasn't it?
80s.
And it was in the late 80s.
Yeah.
I think we got enough direction, we can draft a policy to bring back to it. And whatever, policies adopted, we'll just include that in the, as we're looking at next year's budget, putting it together, that'd be what we go off of.
Where do we start that budget?
In about a week. Working on getting some information together and get our new folks sworn in. It's just about on time schedule anyway, I think.
We'll go down to the very end of it like we did last year. Okay. So you work that ready for the next meeting?
Yep. Let's see, it's Wednesday, yeah. Have it together by then. So packets are going out Thursday, right? Yeah.
Okay. That it?
Anything else? That's it, as far as policy is, that meeting is concerned? That's good.
Can I adjourn?
No, we're adjourning.